The spleen is a lymphatic organ which filters the blood. The channel reflects that and follows the great saphenous vein in the lower leg and the femoral artery in the thigh, and then it coagulates at spleen 12-13 at the inguinal lymph nodes. The abdominal part of the channel weaves around the lymph of the intestines, and then on the chest the channel relates to the heart and wraps around the rib cage. There are two parts of the description of the spleen channel pathways that invite further contemplation on the role of the spleen channel in mental emotional issues and in postural issues. The channel has a branch that returns through the stomach, departs above the diaphragm, and pours into the heart center. This is very unusual because there is no other channel except for the heart that comes into the heart center. The spleen has a special relationship with the heart. The yi, our awareness, is always going to be involved in our emotional state. Whether it is anger, fear, depression, sadness, or any other emotional state, it is our awareness of it that makes it a state of mind rather than a physiological reaction. Without awareness of, say, our anger, it is simply passing and it does not become part of our mind's landscape. With awareness, it settles in and becomes a mental formation, part of our consciousness. The expression, Xinzheng, the heart center, is not just a physical location, as in the midpoint of the heart, but it can also mean one's focus, one's thoughts. Another phrase in Ling Shu 10, when describing the channel, is that it moves up and kicks inside. This expression is found also in describing the kidney channel, and also in the bladder channel, but in the bladder channel it says moves down rather than moves up. The character chuai, to kick, means the leg and its focus, juan. Juan, to focus, shows a plant growing above ground as well as below, although the meaning of these two components are actually mounted and also. It suggests that the spleen is involved in creating a kick, or rather a stomp, an upward movement in the lower leg that is initiated with a downward press, and that it contributes to this upward movement, which is primarily seen in the more skeletal channels of the bladder and the kidney. Of course, the spleen is said to raise the clear yang, but what is suggested here is that the spleen has a postural effect, and clinically this is true with the spleen having a strong influence on the spine, the hips, the neck, and the shoulders. So we see that the spleen is involved in the activity of raising upwards, against gravity. We do say, after all, that it is responsible for the muscles. The character for spleen has the flesh radical on the left and inferior on the right. It is an inferior organ, so to speak, in that it does the grunt work, and one of those grunt jobs is to sustain the upright posture. This is done by stomping or pressing the foot down in order to create an upward vector. This is going to be the theme of the first points on the spleen channel of the arch of the foot. In order to push up, it is important that we anchor the inside arch of the foot, which is the spleen channel. We cannot rise if we just roll over to the lateral side of the foot. We need to activate, to press down on the spleen side, especially on spleen 3 and the ball of the foot. And so spleen 1 through spleen 3 reflect that and have the character white or clear, bai, in them. White is the color of the light when the sun rises. The character is the sun with a dot above it, indicating that the sun has just risen. Spleen 1, in bai, is the hidden white. In means to secrete, secret, or concealed. The right part of the character means careful. Spleen 2, Da Do, is translated by Ellis as a great metropolis, but it can also be translated as great entirety or great whole. The character Do is composed of a city on the right, and the left part has the character Bai at the bottom. It is supposed to represent clear white with a pictograph of grain stalks, although the meaning is simply to be or to have. Spleen 3, Tai Bai, is the great white, or the great clearness. Although spleen 1 is famous as a TCM point to stop bleeding, I generally use spleen 7, Lo Gu, the leaking valley, for that purpose. I use spleen 2 primarily for diagnosis, as it is the fire point. If spleen 2 has pressure pain on it, I use spleen 5 and 9, metal and water, to affect it. Also, for patients who are very ticklish, one can press on spleen 2 and then they tend to be less ticklish, which means you can palpate them a little bit more easily. However, it is then hard to palpate the body with one hand always pressing on spleen 2. Spleen 3 is a major point that I use a lot. It is the main point for sugar imbalances and essential for use in diabetic patients, regardless of their chief complaint. For diabetes, it is used with kidney points and the immune points, right stomach 22, gate of gate, the OD point, and T11 and T12 on the back. It is also used for numbness and for neuropathy with lung 8. Spleen 3 is considered to be reducing glucose levels in the blood, so it reduces the viscosity of the blood, and lung 8 is considered to be oxygenating the blood. Spleen 3 is used for any kind of pain that is muscular in nature, muscle contractions or cramps. This includes uterine contraction pain. It is also the first choice point for releasing the scalings and the brachial plexus, stomach 11, stomach 12 area, which makes it an important point for repetitive strain injuries in the arm, shoulder, or neck. Spleen 3, in combination with pericardium points, is an important point for anxiety and depression, which may show as pressure pain on REN 17 or REN 15. And it is an important point for patients whose pulse on the right guan, the middle position, disappears when pressing on it. Notice that this is one type of spleen responding weakness in the pulse. The other spleen responding pulse is one that is weak and short, meaning it does not fill the length of all three positions. This pulse responds better to spleen 6, spleen 9, and pericardium. Spleen 3 is the one that's good when the pulse is weak and the middle position on the right disappears on pressure. It is also a good point for cardiac patients with a weak pulse. Generally, it is said that 2 points of different elements on the same channel tends to counter the effect of the other, with the exception of metal and water points, which work synergistically to overcome fire. However, in the case of spleen 3, Tai Bai, it can be combined with spleen 9, the yin mount spring, yin ling chuan, and even though these are earth and water points, they can enhance each other and do not cancel each other. I believe these points have a similarity in that they spring upwards kind of thing. Spleen 3 is where we ground ourselves at the ball of the foot, and spleen 9 is where one can have an upward spring from below the knee. Generally, one translates spleen 4, Gongsun, as grandfather grandson, but public grandson is just as fair a translation. Gongsun is also a surname. Grandfather grandson implies a continuation of ancestry, a line that goes from the past to the future, extending infinitely in both directions. Public grandson would basically imply the same thing. One's descendants are not limited to just you. They belong and are related to everyone. We all share the ancestors, or as the word Chan, meditation, suggests, there is ultimately only one ancestor, one source. The Chang is considered to be the source, or as Jeffrey Yuen would call it, the blueprint. It relates us to our ancestors and the curriculum given to us in this life. Ancestral lineage, something that moves in both back and forward directions, is very similar to pressing down in order to move up, moving in two opposite directions, one reinforcing the other. I use spleen 4 structurally, primarily for inner knee-eye pain. It can work for either same side or opposite side inner knee-eye pain, and combined with pericardium 6. Spleen 4 with pericardium 6 is also a good combination when there is pressure pain on stomach 21, as in cases of ulcers. Spleen 4 supports lung points, usually lung 5, for breathing problems when the problem is on the exhalation. Kidney 4 would be the point to use if the problem is when inhaling. It is also a good point to use in cardiac patients who have a large pulse. Spleen 5, Shangqiu, the merchant hill, does have a small hill, a slight puffiness it sits on. Of course, it is just below quite a prominent hill of the medial malleolus, but the hill spleen 5 sits on is in the fascia. Shang is generally thought of as related to metal, as exchanging tends to be in the domain of metal. Spleen 5 is a major point for treating inflammatory conditions in the lower jiao, together with liver 5. Both points work best with Oku, direct moxa. Spleen 5 is thought of as tonifying the mucosal membranes. As the metal point on the channel, spleen 5 and spleen 9 act as metal-water combination for conditions that show as spleen 2 pressure pain. This is also a combination used on the left side for diarrhea, with liver 4 and liver 8 on the right side. Right spleen 5 and spleen 9 are used often in patients who have had appendicitis and show pressure pain on right stomach 26-27 area. Spleen 9 is also a point that is used for, spleen 5, is a point that's used for vaginal discharge as well. All of these capacities, or what TCM might call functions, of spleen 5 involve some sort of exchange, clearing something out, which is in line with the idea of it relating to metal and having the name implying exchange. Spleen 5 combined with stomach 41 is an excellent combination for all knee problems. Spleen 6, Sun Yin Jiao, the 3 yin meetings, is a famous point with many uses, based on it being the meeting point of the 3 yin channels of the leg. For me, spleen 6 has a clear relationship with the head. Spleen 6 and lung 7 are used for hormonal type headaches. Spleen 6, spleen 9, pericardium points, and lung 5 are used together for depression, especially postpartum depression, showing as pressure pain on or around DU20. Any kind of blood pressure abnormality, high blood pressure, low blood pressure, too small or too wide a gap between systolic and diastolic pressures, all can be treated using spleen 6, spleen 9, pericardium, and the point under the third toe. Spleen 6 with pericardium 4 or pericardium 6 is also the point of choice for anemia patients, using Oku, direct moxa, on spleen 6. By name, spleen 6 is related to Ren 7, Yin Jiao, and indeed spleen 6 will clear pressure pain on Ren 7. Spleen 7, Lo Gu, is the leaking valley. You will find an indentation right behind the bone, and in some cases the point will leave a mark when you press on it, like pitting edema. At times it will feel like a nodule here also, but the quality is puffy and mushy. The name suggests that it treats leakage or dripping. Lo means to leak or to drip or to let out. Gu, valley, is a character shared with kidney 2, Rangu, the blazing valley. Of the points that share the character Gu, kidney 2 is the one that utilizes fire in the other character, as in Rangu, and spleen 7 utilizes water in the other character, loku, so kidney 2 and spleen 7 have a relationship in that manner. Some people describe a branch of the kidney channel that connects kidney 2 and spleen 7. Nagano felt that spleen 7 was a point on the spleen channel with kidney functions. Spleen 7 is the best point for water accumulation. It is the main point in the combination of spleen 3, spleen 7, and spleen 11 used for edema. It is also the best point to stop bleeding, be it gynecological, digestive, urinary, or any other kind of bleeding. It is used for ear infections with Sanjiao 8. And spleen 7 is a point that is used for prostatitis, as its name suggests, since there is leakage and lack of letting out at the same time. It is also a point that likes okyu moxa, direct moxa. Spleen 8, DG, the earth machine, suggests the capacity of creating the earth element, that is, the flesh. It regenerates cells, regenerates the flesh. I take this point 2-tsun rather than 3-tsun, below spleen 9, and one might even consider it to be similar to Shenguan, the Tong kidney gate point, also known as Tianwang Fu, which is officially 1.5-tsun below spleen 9. This is a point to consider when you want to regenerate flesh or build new cells. Spleen 9, Yin Ling Chuan, is paired with gallbladder 34, Yang Ling Chuan. These two mount springs, yin and yang on either side, under the knee, support our posture. They provide the springing up from under the knee. Notice that just like the points in the feet, the character bai, white, is still part of the name as a component of chuan, fountain. When there is no stomping action, the weight will tend to collapse and the flesh under the knee will droop, creating a mound, if you like. We see that on spleen 9 very commonly. I call this a chubby spleen 9. This is especially common in women. Younger men will tend to have a less fleshy spleen 9, and there will not be much space between the skin and the bone, and it will be tight. But that tends to change with age for men also. Spleen 9 is a very good point for L4, L5 disc problems. Gallbladder 34 is a good point for sacroiliac ligament problems, and the sacroiliac ligaments affect L4 and L5. Spleen 9 on the right side is used for appendix scars and digestive issues, often with spleen 5, if there is pressure pain on spleen 2. Spleen 5 and 9 are used together on the left side for diarrhea, with right side liver 4 and liver 8. Pain on gallbladder 21 can be released with spleen 9, as it is considered as gallbladder wood overacting on earth spleen, so tonifying the earth spleen releases the pain. Spleen 9 seems to give a smoother quality to the pulse also. It can be a supporting point for strengthening weak pulses with either spleen 3 or spleen 6, and it is also used with gallbladder 39 for strong wiry pulses. Spleen 9 and gallbladder 39 is a combination used for brain damage, especially Parkinson's, with wiry pulse. Spleen 9 is also used as part of the combination that treats any kind of blood pressure disorder, be it high, low, or unusual gap between the diastolic and the systolic pressures, with a full combination being spleen 6, spleen 9, pericardium, and under the third toe. Shui Hai, spleen 10, is the ocean of blood. Ocean means where all the water goes to. It might be that because of the femoral artery, this is the area where all the blood comes to the large artery with a lot of pressure. The front, medial part of the thigh does have a strong effect on circulation. I use spleen 10 primarily as part of the facelift treatment of the quadriceps to support the knee, and that is done together with stomach 34, needling them both upwards, re-educating the quads to lift up. I also add spleen 10 to either spleen 3 or spleen 6 or 9 for very weak pulses. Spleen 3 is generally for weak pulse that disappears in the second position, while spleen 6 and spleen 9 are for weak pulse that is short, it does not fill all three positions. Spleen 6 with OQ is the preferred point in anemia. All of these you can add spleen 10 to. Spleen 10 is also one of the points that is named ocean. Those points are kidney 6, spleen 10, ren 6, heart 3, and small intestine 8. And those treat issues that involve mineral imbalances, such as psoriasis, stones, vitamin or mineral overdosing, etc. Bladder 24 is another point that carries the ocean character in its name, but we tend not to add it to these treatments. Spleen 11's name, Qimen, means a gate of a dustpan, or of a bamboo basket that is used to separate the dust from the grain. It is unclear to me how this came to be the name of this point. Ellis interprets it to mean the groove or the hole that is created when squatting in the position that one would take when one works on these kinds of baskets. Spleen 11 is a supporting point for moving water, with spleen 3, spleen 7, and spleen 11. The main point in this combination is spleen 7. After the water is moved, using this combination, the quadratus lumborum is stimulated with bladder 20, 23, 25, and bladder 28 to get the kidneys to excrete that water that just got moved. Perhaps Nagano felt that the name of this basket, which separates the grain and the chaff, could be applied to separating the excess water from the physiological water. The point works best on the spleen channel, where one pinches the skin and feels thickness, that it's thicker when you pinch than anywhere else. Ellis interprets Chongmen, spleen 12, the surging gate, as related to the artery pulsing or surging. That also corresponds to the branch of the Chong that moved from stomach 30 down the leg. An additional interpretation, similar to how I look at liver 12, is that spleen 12 at the top front of the thigh is related to the state of the nervous system. Tightness here tightens the nervous system. When we tuck in our tailbone and press into the front of the thigh, the area of liver 12 and spleen 12, the nervous system becomes heavier and slower, tighter. When the tailbone is pushed back and liver 12, spleen 12 are carried with it, the mood shifts and becomes more impatient. Chong is to surge, or to flush, or to rinse, all of which can be said about the activity of the nerves. Chemically speaking, they surge, flush, and rinse chemically the next nerve cell in progression. That is pretty much the definition of nerve conduction. I use spleen 12 and liver 12 for people with tight nervous systems, needling the area up and inwards towards stomach 30. Tightness here can also prevent circulation into the leg, as well as disrupt circulation into the abdomen. I release the tightness here with either kidney 7, liver 4, or spleen 9, depending on where the most congestion is in the inner thigh, and then I can also needle the inner thigh itself, upwards and inwards towards the torso. This area is also big for big toe issues. On the abdomen, the spleen channel reflects the nature of the spleen as a lymph organ, so it weaves around the organs, as lymph does. And it is not one straight line going up four-tongue lateral to the center, from 13 to 14 to 15, etc. This weaving allows the channel to connect with a Ren channel at Ren 3, 4, and 10. Then, in the chest, it again surrounds the ribcage from the side and finally wraps around it from Dabao, spleen 21, which is what the lymph does. The lower abdominal spleen channel on the left side reflects the descending colon and may have pressure pain in cases of ulcerative colitis, IBS, or it may feel bloated or knotted in cases of constipation. Spleen 13, Fu Shi, the palace of residence, might suggest the sigmoid colon. Fu, a palace, is a place where exchange happens, which is what the sigmoid colon is about. Spleen 14, Fu Ai, the abdominal knot, is clearly about knots one might get in the intestine. Sorry, that was Fu Jie. Spleen 14 is Fu Jie, not Fu Ai. Sorry. Spleen 15, Da Heng, the great horizontal, is a hinge like stomach 25, Tian Shu, the celestial hinge, celestial pivot. But being more lateral, it would tend to be somewhat less pivotal, so to speak. As the great horizontal, spleen 15 has the ability to correct and balance lateral shifts in the vertical axis. Scoliosis might be such a shift, but less severe forms can involve torques in the soft tissue and may reflect on kidney 11, Hengu, the horizontal bone, or on stomach 9, which sits over the hyoid bone, which is a horizontal bone. Spleen 16, Fu Ai, the abdominal sorrow or abdominal grief, might be the way the ancients saw the intestinal flexures, the hepatic flexure and the splenic flexure, and therefore the possibility of things getting stuck or where abdominal sounds might emanate from. Spleen 17, Shi Do, the food hole, might be a reference to the liver's glycogen, sort of a food storage idea. Do is something that digs, to burrow. It is also referring to a penetrating action, which can also be related to insulin. However, I do not have a clear clinical correlation to these ideas. Now we're entering the domain of the chest and the spleen's relationship to the physical heart. The name of spleen 18, Tianxi, the heavenly creek, does not induce much in me. One would assume that Tian, heaven, is probably relating to the chest and to the heart, and Xi, creek, which is usually used in points that are between tendons, might be referring to the action of penetrating or flowing, perhaps to the lymph of the chest cavity. While one would assume that on the left side it might reflect cardiac conditions, the area to the left of the breast that reflects cardiac conditions, indeed, we happen to call pericardium 1, even though it is more lateral and off the breast, so it is really even more lateral to spleen 18. Spleen 19, Xiangxiang, the chest country, is clearly referring to its location in the chest. Xiang means the countryside, the region between cities, where the food is being grown. Are these cities here organs such as the lungs and the heart? Is the food meant to be the zongqi? I do not know the answers to these questions, but if we keep contemplating, we may find something or some interesting tidbit. Spleen 20, Jiu Rong, the circulatory flourishing, is another reflex of the heart on the left side. The name may suggest that it is about making the complete circuit all around the body. Zhou also means not just complete or all around, but also helpful, careful, or cautious, or to pay attention. So this is a point that reflects the circulation, helps the circulation, indicates if care or caution is needed. So it is used a little bit like an alarm point for circulatory issues for the heart. Dabao, spleen 21, the great wrapping, again demonstrates the spleen's role in wrapping, as the lymph do. In this case, this is the great wrapping of the chest. There are many theoretical explanations as to why Dabao is supposed to be for pain all over the body, but I have not found it to be useful for that at all. Perhaps the point is meant to be bled as a low point, something that I do not do. In fact, I find gallbladder 22 to be a much more effective point, especially for shoulder pain. What spleen 21 does have the capacity to do is to relax the intercostal and facilitate more breathing capacity. Perhaps that was thought to affect pain all over.